And we are now at part 3 of the uploaded portion of the Torah for Shabbat service for Waymaker Messianic Jewish and Christian Center USA. This is Saturday, March 13th, 2021, on the Gregorian calendar, and Adar 28, 5781 on the Hebrew calendar. So we're going to be talking now in chapter 39 of the holy garments for Aaron and his sons. Next, they made woven garments of blue, purple, and scarlet for ministering in the holy place. They made the holy garments for Aaron, as Adonai commanded Moses. He made the ephod of gold, blue, purple, scarlet, and finely twisted linen. They hammered the gold into thin plates and cut it into threads to work it in with the blue, purple, and scarlet within the fine linen, the work of a skillful craftsman. Then they made shoulder pieces for it, joined together at the two ends. The artfully woven band on the ephod with which to gird it was of the same piece and of the same kind of workmanship of gold, blue, purple, scarlet, and finely twisted linen, as Adonai commanded Moses. They placed the onyx stones enclosed in settings of gold, etched with the engravings of a signet seal, according to the names of Bnei Israel. He put them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod to be memorial stones for Bnei Israel, as Adonai commanded Moses. He made the breastplate the work of a skillful craftsman, like the work of the ephod, of gold, blue, purple, scarlet, and finely twisted linen. It was square and folded double, a span long and a span wide. They mounted within it 4 rows of stones. A row of ruby, topaz, and emerald were the first row. In the second row were a turquoise, a sapphire, and a diamond. In the third row were a jacinth, an agate, and an amethyst. In the fourth row were a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. They were enclosed in fittings of gold within their settings. The stones corresponded to the names of Bnei Israel, like the engravings of a signet seal, each one according to its name for the 12 tribes. They attached braided chains to the breastplate of wreathed work from pure gold. They made 2 settings of gold and 2 golden rings, and set the 2 rings on the 2 ends of the breastplate. They attached the 2 golden chains to the 2 rings at the ends of the breastplate. The other 2 ends of the chains they placed on the 2 settings and fastened them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod in the front. They also made 2 golden rings and set them on the 2 ends of the breastplate, on the edge that was towards the side of the ephod facing inward. They made 2 more rings of gold and put them on the 2 shoulder pieces of the ephod underneath in the front, enclosed by their coupling, above the artfully woven band of the ephod. Then they bound the breastplate by the rings to the rings of the ephod with a blue thread, so that it would rest on the artfully woven band and not be loosened from the ephod, as Adonai commanded Moses. He also made the robe of the ephod from woven work, olive blue, with a hole in the center of the robe and a binding woven around the hole as a collar, so that it would not be torn. They also made on the hem of the robe pomegranates of blue, purple, scarlet, and twisted linen. Then they made bells of pure gold, and put the bells between the pomegranates on the hem of the robe, all around. Between the pomegranates, a bell and a pomegranate, then another bell and a pomegranate, all around on the hem of the robe to minister in, as Adonai commanded Moses. Then they made the sashes of fine linen, woven work for Aaron and for his sons, the turban of fine linen, the headwear, the linen undergarments of finely twisted linen, along with a tunic of checkered work in blue, purple, and scarlet, the work of a color weaver, as Adonai commanded Moses. Finally, they made the plate of the holy coronet from pure gold, and wrote an inscription on it, like the engraving of a signet seal, "Holy to Adonai." They tied to it a blue thread to fasten onto the turban above, as Adonai commanded Moses. So all the work of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, was finished. Bnei Israel did everything according to what Adonai had commanded Moses. They did it just so. Then they brought the tabernacle to Moses, along with the tent and all of its furnishings, its clasps, its boards, its crossbars, its pillars, and its bases, along with the covering of ram skins dyed red, and the coverings of sealskins, the veil of the curtain, as well as the ark of the testimony with its poles, and the atonement cover, the table and all of its utensils, the showbread, the pure menorah with its lamps to be set in order, along with all of its utensils, and oil for the light, the golden altar, the anointing oil, the sweet incense, and the curtain for the entrance of the tent, the bronze altar, its grating and its poles, along with all of its utensils, and the basin and its base, the hangings for the courtyard with its pillars, its bases, and the curtain for the gate of the courtyard with its cords and its pegs, along with all the instruments for the service of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, as well as the woven garments for ministering in the sanctuary, the holy garments for Aaron the Kohen and for his sons to serve as Kohanim. According to everything that Adonai had commanded Moses, Benaiah Israel had done all the work just so. When Moses saw the entire work and that they had done it just as Adonai had commanded, Moses blessed them. I also want to mention, I had mentioned before that a talent of silver contained about 3,000 shekels, but a talent is also equal to about 75 pounds. So that's a lot. Chapter 40, Setting up the tabernacle. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, On the first day of the first month you will set up the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. You are to put the ark of the testimony there, and screen off the ark with the curtain. Then bring in the table and set in order the bread that is on it. Bring in the menorah and light its lamps. Set the golden incense altar in front of the ark of the testimony, and hang the curtain over the entrance of the tabernacle. Set the altar of burnt offering before the entrance of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. Set up the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water in it. Set up the courtyard all around and hang the curtain of the gate of the courtyard. Take the anointing oil and anoint the tabernacle and everything within it, and consecrate it along with all its furnishings, and it will be holy. Also you are to anoint the altar of burnt offering with all of its utensils and consecrate the altar. The altar will be most holy. Then you are to anoint the basin along with its base and sanctify it. Bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting and wash them with water. Put the holy garments on Aaron, anoint him and consecrate him so that he may minister to me as a Kohen. Also bring his sons and put tunics on them. You are to anoint them as you did their father, so that they too may minister to me as Kohanim. Their anointing will be for an everlasting priesthood throughout their generations. Moses did so just as Adonai commanded him. Now it happened during the first month of the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was raised up. Moses raised the tabernacle and laid its basis, set up the framework of boards, put in the crossbars, and set up its pillars. Then he spread the tent over the tabernacle and put the covering of the tent on it, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. He placed the testimony into the ark, set the poles on the ark, and put the atonement cover on top of the ark. He brought the ark into the tabernacle, set up the curtain as a screen, and screened off the ark of the testimony, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. Then he set up the table inside the tent of meeting, on the side of the tabernacle northward, outside the curtain. He set a row of bread in order upon it before Adonai, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. Then he placed the menorah in the tent of meeting, over against the table on the south side of the tabernacle. Then he lit the lamps before Adonai, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. Next he placed the golden altar in the tent of meeting before the curtain. And he burned sweet spices of incense there, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. He hung the curtain over the entrance of the tabernacle. Then he set the altar of burnt offering at the entrance of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, and offered upon it burnt offering and the grain offering, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. Next he set up the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water in it for washing, so that Moses, Aaron, and his sons could wash their hands and their feet there. When they went into the tent of meeting and when they came near to the altar, they washed, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. He set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and the altar and set up the screen at the gate of the courtyard. So Moses finished the work. Glory fills the tabernacle. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Adonai filled the tabernacle. Moses was unable to enter into the tent of meeting because the cloud resided there, and the glory of Adonai filled the tabernacle. Now, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, Bnei Israel went onward throughout all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not move out until the day that it was. The cloud of Adonai was on the tabernacle by day, and a fire was there by night in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. And that is the end of the Torah portion for this week, both Torah portions. So to recap our Torah portion, we begin with Moses collecting the donations from Bnei Israel and the contributions, and with Moses instructing Bnei Israel what is going to happen. And so these preparations are made. And Bezalel and Aholiab were actually, the Ruach breathed into them, and they knew exactly what they needed to do. So the tabernacle was built down to the very letter of what God had shown Moses. And then we continue on to the second section of this, the Torah portion of Pekudei, where the clothing for the priests were made. And then we move on to the final part uh, where God gave instruction for when the tabernacle needed to be assembled, and it was assembled and put together. And of course, there was the cloud that rested on the tabernacle, and when the cloud was over the tabernacle, Bnei Israel would not travel anywhere. When the cloud was lifted off the tabernacle, Bnei Israel knew that they would be continuing their travels in their journey to the promised land. Um, so there was a cloud by day and a fire by night. The other thing that I wanted to mention in Parashat VaYakhel, Moses made it very clear that the seventh day is the Shabbat to Adonai, and everyone needed to do no work. They couldn't even light a fire in their home. Um, they needed to, this was a complete day of rest. In the Haftarah portion, one of the readings is from First Kings chapter 7, verses 13 to 26. Hiram the bronze craftsman, King Solomon sent for and had Hiram brought from Tyre. He was a widow's son from the tribe of Naphtali, while his father was a man of Tyre, a coppersmith, and he was filled with wisdom, understanding, and skill to do any work in bronze. So he came to King Solomon and executed all his work. He fashioned the two bronze pillars, 18 cubits high and 12 cubits in circumference each. He also made two capitals of molten bronze to set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of each capital was 5 cubits. Nettings of lattice work and twisted threads of chain work for the capitals were on top of the pillars, 7 for the one capital and 7 for the other capital. So he made the pillars with 2 rows of pomegranates all around the netting covering the capitals on top of each capital. The capitals that were on the top of the pillars in the portico were of lily design 4 cubits high. So also the capitals on the 2 pillars close to the belly next to the netting were the pomegranates in rows of 200 around both capitals. Thus he set up the pillars. At the porticos of the temple, he set up the right pillar and named it Jachin, Jachin, and he set up the left pillar and named it Boaz. On the top of the pillars was a lily design, so the work of the pillars was finished. Next, he made the seat of cast metal, 10 cubits across from brim to brim, circular in form, 5 cubits in its height, and 30 cubits in circumference. Under its brim there were gourds encircling it 10 per cubit, completely surrounding the sea. The gourds were cast in 2 rows, in one piece with it. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. And the sea was set on top of them, and all their rear parts were inward. It was a handbreadth thick, and its brim was made like the brim of a cup, like the petal of a lily. In it held 11,000 gallons. In the next section, we begin with First Kings chapter 7, verses 40 into the 8th chapter. Then Hiram made the basins, the shovels, and the sprinkling bowls. So Hiram finished doing all the work that he performed for King Solomon on Adonai's house, the 2 pillars, the 2 bowls of the capitals, and that were on the top of the pillars, the 2 nettings to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 nettings, 2 rows of pomegranates for each to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals on top of the pillars, the 10 bases and the 10 basins on the bases, the 1 sea and the 12 oxen under the sea, the pots, the shovels, and the basins. All the vessels Hiram made for King Solomon in the house of Adonai were made of polished bronze. The king had them cast in the plain of the Jordan with clay of the ground between Sukkot and Zarethan. Solomon left all the vessels unweighed because they were too many. The weight of the bronze could not be determined. So Solomon made all the equipment that was to be in the house of Adonai, the golden altar, the table on which the bread of the presence of, of gold, the menorahs, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left, in front of the inner sanctuary of pure gold, the flowers, the lamps, and the tongues of gold, the cups, the snuffers, the bowls, the wick trimmers, and the fire pans of pure gold, the hinges for the doors of the inner house and the holy of holies, and for the doors of the house that is of the temple of gold. When all the work that King Solomon did in Adonai's house was finished, Solomon brought in the things that his father David had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and put them in the treasuries of the house of Adonai. So we were reading in the Torah, this was the tabernacle. This was, the tabernacle actually moved with the people as they journeyed. The temple was actually the place that was stationary. That was Solomon who built that first one. Dedicating the temple, we continue with chapter 8. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes, and the ancestral chieftains of the children of Israel to King Solomon in Jerusalem to bring the ark of the covenant of Adonai up from the city of David, which is in Zion. And remember when they were assembling the tabernacle. So this is the assembling of everything and dedicating the temple as well. All the men of Israel assembled themselves to King Solomon at the feast in the month of Ethanim, which is the 7th month. Then all the elders of Israel came, and the Kohanim brought up the ark. They brought up the ark of Adonai, the tent of meeting, and the holy vessels that were in the tent of the Kohanim, and the Levites brought them up. Now King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who were assembled were with him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and oxen that they could not be numbered or counted. The Kohanim brought the ark of the covenant of Adonai to its place into the inner sanctuary of the house, the Holy of Holies, under the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim spread out their wings over the place of the ark, and the cherubim covered the ark and its poles from above. But the poles were so long, and the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen outside. There, there they are to this day. Nothing was in the ark except the 2 tables of stone that Moses put there at Horeb, when Adonai cut a covenant with the children of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. Now, when the Kohanim came out of the holy place, the cloud filled the house of Adonai, so that the Kohanim could not stand to minister because of the cloud. Remember, that happened with Moses in the tabernacle when the cloud came. For the glory of Adonai filled the house of Adonai. Then Solomon spoke. Adonai said that he would dwell in the thick cloud. I have surely built you a magnificent house, a place for your dwelling forever. Then the king turned his face about and blessed the whole congregation of Israel. While the whole congregation of Israel was standing, he said, Blessed be Adonai, the God of Israel, who spoke with his mouth to my father David and has fulfilled it by his hand, saying, Since the day I brought my people Israel out from Egypt, I have not chosen a city out of all the tribes of Israel to build a house where my name would be there, but I have chosen David to be over my people Israel. Now it was in the heart of my father David to build a house for the name of Adonai, the God of Israel. But Adonai said to my father David, Because it was in your heart to build a house for my name, and you did well that it was in your heart. Nevertheless, you will not build the house, but your son, who will come out of your loins, he shall build the house for my name. Now Adonai has fulfilled his word that he spoke, for I have risen in the place of my father David and sit on the throne of Israel as Adonai promised. Also, I have built the house for the name of Adonai, the God of Israel, and have set there a place for the ark, in which is the covenant of Adonai, which he made with our fathers when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. Then Solomon stood before the altar of Adonai in the presence of all the congregation of Israel, spread out his hands towards heaven, and said, Adonai, God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below, keeping covenant and loving kindness to your servants who walk before you with all their heart. You have kept what you promised with your servant David, my father. Yes, you spoke with your mouth and fulfilled it with your hand, as it is this day. Now, therefore, Adonai, God of Israel, keep with your servant David, my father, what you have promised him, saying, You shall not lack a man to sit before me on the throne of Israel. If only your children watch their way, walking before me as you have walked before me. Now, therefore, God of Israel, please let your word be confirmed, which you spoke to your servant, my father David. So will God really dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain you, have much less this house that I have built. Nevertheless, turn to the prayer of your servant and to his supplication, Adonai, my God, to listen to the cry and to the prayer which your servant prays before you this day. Let your eyes be open towards this house, night and day, toward the place of which you have said, My name shall be there, listening to the prayer which your servant shall pray towards this place. So listen to the supplication of your servant and your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear in heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. If a man sins against his neighbor and is made to take an oath, then comes and swears before your altar in this house, then hear from heaven and act and judge your servants, condemning the wicked, bringing his way on his own head, and justifying the righteous, giving him according to his righteousness. When your people Israel are defeated before an enemy because they have sinned against you, if they turn back to you and confess your name and pray and make supplication to you in this house, then hear from heaven and forgive the sins of your people Israel and bring them back to the land which you gave to their fathers. When the skies are shut up and there is no rain because they have sinned against you, yet if they pray toward this place and confess your name and turn from their sin because you have afflicted them, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your servants and your people Israel. Teach them the good way in which they should walk and send rain on your land, which you gave to your people as an inheritance. And I'm going to pause it here and come back with part 4.